I really don't understand. Is inequality the problem that he's pointing out here? Is it environmental issues that he's pointing out here? If it is about inequality, then we can talk about inequality. If it is about environmental issues, we can do that as well.
Perhaps we should talk about inequality, I think.
Let's talk about inequality then. Well, I can tell you it could be true that we could see, and again, these sort of things are measured in a certain manner, and it's not necessarily right. Since we don't even know what the size of the economy is, we can't really measure the size of inequality. But okay, having said that, it's very clear that there are some people in the world that are immensely wealthy, and many people in the world that are very, very, very poor. But even the poor and even the very poor, in fact, I think it's 2 years ago that the Chinese reached this amazing their goal that they set themselves out to reach, and that is to get rid of absolute poverty. There is no more absolute poverty in China. So there could be an increase in inequality, but I would argue, but so what? Because we don't have people living in absolute poverty anymore. Anyway, if you're poor today, I can tell you, if I'm poor and I have a choice, I would certainly want to be poor in a rich country, and certainly don't want to be poor in a poor country, as an example. In the case of South Africa, if we talk about inequality, the biggest driver for inequality in South Africa is unemployment. And if you can only get people employed in one way or the other, and again, but the best answer to that is economic growth, then that will have a huge impact on inequality. So I don't understand what this thing is about inequality. A very good example in the case of South Africa, apart from unemployment, all we need to do, we have to pay the civil servants in South Africa what they are worth, which is much less than what they're currently getting, generally speaking. And that in itself will reduce inequality. Getting rid of 1 or 2 billionaires is not going to change inequality in South Africa. Or anywhere in the world for that matter. There are many other bigger forces driving inequality, like, for example, unemployment in the case of South Africa. So I don't understand really what this debate is about. Let me give you an environmental argument, a calculation that I have done. Now, we know that the ANC government destroyed South Africa and just about everything that they've touched. It is the most destructive force this economy has ever seen. This government, it is a criminal organization masquerading as a government, nothing else than that. And we can see that in the collapse of Eskom. Eskom has been running to the ground operationally and financially. But because we do not have electricity in South Africa, our electricity productivity increased by more than 20%. That's one example how we're actually making better use of electricity. And there are many other examples as well. So yes, there's still environmental issues. There are still poor people. There's still inequality in the world. But the general direction of everything is moving in the right direction.
Yeah. So go ahead, Malcolm.
I disagree. And again, I mean, you can argue, we can pick arguments about whether we have a sense of what the economy is, whether we can actually come close to valuing the economy in real terms. And I've got no problem with that. But the point is, the data in evidence, and some work that is now being done in the informal economy for the first time in a very serious way by a bunch of developmental economists, is beginning to suggest at least something of what the picture is what the contours of the picture should look like. And the problem I've got here is that there is, along with growth, rising concentrations of wealth. And I mean, whether you dispute the data coming out officially from the IMF, the World Bank, and even the WEF and Oxfam, for that matter, which sits on the other side. Even if you dispute that, the overwhelming evidence suggests that there's rising concentrations of wealth, among individuals, and that's part of the concern about inequality. For the most part, we avoid the stark reality of these numbers. I mean, the default assumption is that crises aside, growth will continue indefinitely and that things are getting better. You can raise China as an example and so on and so forth. But growth has delivered the bottom line. It's since the Second World War has delivered its benefits at best unequally. I mean, we can't move away from that. A fifth of the world's population, you can dispute that statistic. There's a margin of error always. But a fifth of the world's population earns just 2% of global income. Inequality is higher in OECD nations than it was 20 years ago. And while the rich got richer, let me finish. Middle class incomes in Western countries were stagnant in real terms long before we hit recession, and certainly long before 2007. When the global financial crisis hit us. I mean, far from raising the living standard for those who most need it, growth has let I would argue much of the global population down. Wealth has actually trickled up rather than trickle down. And I mean, the kind of logic of much of the policy articulations around the growth narrative has been that if you have more growth, it trickles down. And that was partly, the logic of the pre-19, some of the arguments prior to the introduction of Simon Kuznets' curve. We look, the point is, at the end of the day, we can quibble about whether the data is accurate, or whether it comes close to anything like accuracy. But the reality that we see around us is a world in which growth has a tendency, or is corresponding increasingly with not prosperity for all, but rising inequality and rising poverty also, in the least developed regions of the world.
No,
and I think there's a collective blindness, in a sense that we need to get out of, that kind of collective blindness, which is what is problematic for me, anyway.